Thank you very much, Lee, for that lovely introduction. I have to say I worked for 6 Prime Ministers in 8 years, so I can work with anyone, I reckon. But it's such a great pleasure to be here today at your inaugural SAGE Symposium as you launch the SAGE pilot. And as I hear so much great progress from Susan about how Athena Swan and the appetite for increasing gender equity, gender equality across STEM organisations here in Australia. Susan, like you, I came and loved science at school, did physics, biology, chemistry, 3-unit maths, and when I look back on it, what allowed me then to keep on going with some kind of STEM career, because I did computer science with my law degree, was that I had an amazing teacher, a teacher who believed in me, and I thought, yep, that's it, I'm on that path. So I just think when we talk about changing attitudes to women in STEM, we're talking right back in early childhood and working with the fabulous teachers that are out there. I also want to congratulate the academies and the SAGE Forum for making not just today happen, but for ensuring that research organisations and universities will be able to access all the great talent that exists in this nation. And the idea that in 2013 we had no females as fellows of the Academy of Science, that's a dark day. Let's make sure we never repeat that in the future. But thank you, Donna Ingram, for your beautiful welcome to country. I often catch up with Donna, and you just remind me of the wisdom and the incredible history that we have in this nation. So I want to acknowledge that we're meeting on traditional lands, the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and to pay my respects to elders past and present, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the audience today. You've always been such great advocates for equality in our nation, and I have to say it's been one of the great joys of my life to engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and to learn so much from you, so thank you. So over the years, I've come to know something about universities and research organisations. I've got a twin sister, and I'm sorry if I'm really confusing today, but my identical twin is sitting in the audience. I all put you on notice. If you get some blank looks, it's not that I'm not being hospitable, welcoming, it's that you're talking to my twin sister, but she will embrace you in the same way that I would as well. So having a twin sister who has been an ARC fellow, and also a younger sister who's worked in medicine in an academic role for many years. So I'm surrounded by academics and just keeping up to date with what's happening in the universities. And what I understand is that while women comprise more than half of science PhD graduates and early career researchers, they comprise just around 18% of senior academics in Australian universities and research institutions. And the picture I see when I think about that, it's not too dissimilar to what I see in so many other sectors across Australia, particularly in professional service organisations. And by that I mean organisations offering customised, expert knowledge-based services like many of you in the room do today. But what's changed is that many of them are now recognising that the absence of women perpetuates the absence of women, and that this will be one of the greatest threats to their organisation in the foreseeable future. Because there's numerous reasons that women may not be attracted to or are actually leaving STEM research and university careers. And I'm sure everyone in this room can name a whole number. But one reason I've spoken widely, or one of the reasons I've spoken widely about, is that when I look at university and research systems, I look at what exists today, it makes me realise that many of these systems have been designed by men for men. The structures, the processes, the systems are deeply rooted in a male life trajectory, a male way of being, and that reflects the history of many universities and organisations. I make no judgment about, because that's what has made these institutions proud and strong in the past. But I suppose the question I would ask today is, will that same approach make them strong in the future? Because if I've learnt only one thing during my time as Australia's Sex Discrimination Commissioner, it's this, and that is that if we don't actively and intentionally include women, the system will unintentionally exclude them. Now, the reason for that is not necessarily the intentional exclusion, it's the fact that the system is so deeply rooted in a male way of being that unless you become male, it's the unintentional exclusion. So as Gordon Cairns, one of my male champions and also the chairman of Woolworths, the chairman of Origin, which employs a lot of engineers and people from STEM backgrounds, says, he says, let's not pretend that there aren't already established norms that advantage men. Men invented the system, men largely run the system, men need to step up beside women and change the system. And that's really what the Male Champions of Change is all about. And as I look around today, it's so great to see men in the audience. It just shows how far we've come, because probably a few years ago it would have been all the women talking to all the women and we would have been in heated agreement. But what we've got today in our audience is powerful, decent men working for gender equality and the advancement of women. And I think this is a significant addition to the way we've historically helped accelerate women's careers in science. It's really an extra string to our collective bow. Because in the past, accelerating women's careers has really been about let's fix the women. If we make the women more like men, they will fit into structures that were actually designed for men. But what I've learnt is that if we are to progress, we cannot let this issue of the underrepresentation of women, particularly at senior level, sit solely on the shoulders of women. Gender equality is not a women's issue. It's a social issue, it's an economic issue, it's an issue for all of us. What I recommend is that we identify where power sits in organisations, in nations, and we work with those who have power to create change in the system. So it's not about fixing the women, it's about fixing the system. So to the men in the room today, thank you so much for being an active participant in this conversation, for stepping up and beside us and taking action, for standing with us and joining us in this initiative. You are so much part of a solution. So today I've been asked to consider what men can do to stop the exodus of women from science, and in particular to discuss the disruptive and controversial strategy, which is the Male Champions of Change. Now, the Male Champions of Change commenced about 5 years ago now, and at its core is that it's a strategy about working with the most powerful and influential leaders to redefine the role men play in taking action on gender inequality. So actually, when I first came in as the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, I thought it's women's collective action that's got us to where we are today. And you know what? I stand in awe of those women who chained themselves to the bar so that we could drink at the same prices as men and in the main bar. Prior to that, we were in the ladies' bar. Not only that, we were charged more for our drinks, despite the fact that there was still a gender pay gap. You know, I stand in awe of the women who determined to work even though they were married, those women who worked while pregnant, all the things that allowed me to stand here tall and have been a commissioner with young children. I mean, when I become frustrated, I remind myself that every generation of women is more empowered than the previous generation. But I started to understand early on in my term as Sex Discrimination Commissioner that if we wanted to create gender equality, if we wanted to create change for women in this nation, instead of just relying on the collective action of women, what we really needed was men, powerful, decent men, to take the message of gender equality to other men, because that's what represented the system. So that's what the strategy does. It involves bringing together some of Australia's most powerful men, CEOs in a coalition for change. And the first group, which I call the founding group, began small. It began with 8 Australian leaders It's now, that founding group is now out at 30, but we have heads of government departments, the head of Prime Minister and Cabinet, the head of the Attorney Generals, the head of military, many CEOs of our iconic companies. And they're men who have responsibility for up towards 1 million employees across our nation. They make billions, or have billions of dollars of annual spend, so that the decisions that they make are closely followed by the media and public. So just in terms of how we started, early on with that small group, we came together to take ownership and commit to some difficult decisions, because one thing I would say is that this journey is a courageous journey. There are times when you will have to make decisions which go against everything the system stands for, and it requires incredible persistence. Change is a long and winding road. But the group decided that they would take the hard decisions. They operate according to some strong guiding principles, and these are things that I see in Athena Swan and the work that you're doing. These are non-negotiables. So the guiding principles include: we step up beside women. We don't speak for them. We don't try to save them. We're stepping up beside them as equal partners. Secondly, we prioritise the issue, and that means prioritising funding for change. Thirdly, we stand behind our metrics and our numbers. We take responsibility for them, and we're prepared to be accountable for them. And finally, as I said before, we fix the system, not the women. The male champions, they start by listening widely, not just to their own employees, but also to gender experts. They prioritise making change, and they don't view women from a deficit model. So we've been operating now for about 5 years. We now have almost 150 male champions all across Australia. We come together regularly. The meetings last for 2 hours. They're scheduled a year in advance so everyone can participate. If an individual male champion can't attend, he can't send a delegate, because we knew then all the work would come back down to women. If you don't attend, your voice is not heard. And on that basis, we get about 80% representation at each of our meetings. We take individual and collective actions. So the impact is really established in 3 ways. Firstly, if I can look at how male champions has shifted our nation over the last 5 years, I think one of the major shifts has been that the advocacy in Australia around gender equality has changed. We're now as likely to see men step up as we are women to take a position on gender equality issues. Action has become a core expectation of Australia's leaders. So that's one impact. The conversation in Australia has changed about gender equity, gender equality. The second thing is we've continued to powerfully engage men to tackle gender equality. And instead of now asking, why would I want to join male champions, we've got a long list of CEOs who are asking, how can I be a part of it? We've had over 10 CEO transitions. Many of those CEOs choose to stay on and make gender equality a continuing priority. And when they're succeeded by a woman, which in a sense is the ultimate measure of success, those women come on as special advisors, because where are the other spaces in Australia that men take responsibility for and are held accountable for creating change? So we've also moved to a number of initiatives around disruptive action, because changing gender equality, whether you're a research institute, a university, the military, or indeed the federal police, requires not just strong leadership, it requires disruption. It's disruption of a status quo. So the male champions have more than 15 really bold initiatives which are now being implemented across the whole of a group. And I just thought in closing I'd talk to you about 3. The first one is the panel pledge. This is so simple, and everyone in the room today can walk out of here making a commitment to the panel pledge. The panel pledge is designed to increase the visibility of women as experts. So it's recognising that to build a strong career, women need to be visible. The panel pledge is a pledge that the male champions take not to speak on any panel that does not have a good representation of women speakers, or at any conference where there's not male and female speakers. Because when we look at the research, disappointingly, only 15% of panellists in Australia are women, and in many sectors, including STEM, it's even lower. So the panel pledge, how it works is that if a male champion of change receives an invitation to speak on a panel or sponsor an event or in any way be connected with an event, they will say to the organiser that they've taken the panel pledge and they need to know that there will also be female speakers. They'll request the program of speakers, they'll reserve the right to pull out, even at the last minute, if the final program doesn't have women. And interestingly, when we first started, what the men would do and say, look, I'm happy to speak, but I need to know, are there women speaking as well? How many women will speak on the panel? And that was always an assurance, oh yes, of course, we've got lots of women, tons of them coming along. They'd roll up to the conference and there they were, either on an all-male panel or on a full day of speaking where there were very few women. So they've become a bit craftier. Then they now reserve a right to pull out at the last minute if there isn't a good representation of both male and female speakers. Not only that, they've written to every conference and organisation across Australia signalling their intent to only speak at events which are well gender balanced. Now, the panel pledge has been picked up by all our male champions, but not only that, it's gone much more widely than that, and it's having a powerful impact. In fact, just looking at the data there, as of 2016, we've got several hundred of Australia's most in-demand male speakers committing to the panel pledge. And we worked out they speak at thousands of events every year. So this is really a small thing, but it's having a dramatic impact. As Lima Galbi, who was the Liberian peace activist and Nobel Peace Prize winner, says, she says there can be no legitimate conversation without the voices of women. And that's really where the panel pledge is directed. The second initiative, which I think is one that will align well for the SAGE pilot, is about setting new standards on gender reporting. Because many of you will understand the importance of accurate measurement. That lies at the heart of what you do. That lies at the heart of creating change on gender equality. So what the Male Champions of Change did was to bring together the head of a Treasury, together also with the head of the Australian Securities Exchange, and challenge themselves to ensure that they were using their management systems, such as their targets. Everyone has a target. Without targets, we know you won't make progress, so targets, starting point. But they brought together all the work they were doing around monitoring and troubleshooting to drive improvement in the way they were reporting and progressing gender equality. So they pulled their data and their practices, they worked through a series of workshops with experts, and they identified a new way of reporting. It was a much more granular way, it was linked to scorecards, and their recommendation was to report women's representation across 3 layers of management as a minimum. Not only that, the head of a securities exchange adopted this strategy, and it's now gone through, so every publicly listed company in this nation now must report according to these new reporting guidelines, and that itself has had a really significant impact. If you see the number of women appointed to company boards, so we've gone from 8% in 2009 through to 25% today. And the rate, I just looked before I came, the rate of appointment of women onto ASX 200 boards in the first 6 months of this year has been 42%. Now, I'm sure that the new reporting standards, the level of transparency, has driven a lot of that change in ensuring that all talent, all people of merit can actually contribute to the governance of our major companies. And the final thing is the 50-50, if not, why not? This is a really simple strategy that, once again, you can take as you walk out the door. It's probably the most powerful thought experiment that our male champions started with. And that's to ask the 50-50, if not, why not question. And it's a pretty simple question. It says if women make up 50% of Australia's population, and indeed they're actually at 50.8%, but if they make up 50% of Australia's population, why aren't I seeing 50% of them here in the graduate intake, in this particular promotional level, at professorial level, or whatever it is in your organisation? But to always ask 50-50, if what not, why not? Because when we do that, we start to surface the barriers to women's progress, and not only that, we reimagine normal. Because the problem for most of us is we assume normal is what we see around us. And it's about stepping back from that and saying, no, that's not normal. If we believe talent is evenly distributed between men and women in Australia, if women make up 50.8% of the population, why wouldn't we be seeing more at this particular point in the pipeline? So, for example, for incoming graduates, those who receive career development programs, who get speaking opportunities, who get promoted, who get to go to the meeting, who speak. So, as one of our male champions says, it's like putting on a new pair of glasses and seeing the world in an entirely different way. So just to be clear, the case for gender equality, gender equity, gender diversity, whatever you want to call it, it's not about being nice to women. Yes, I believe fundamentally if gender equality is my birthright, why would I accept anything else? But you don't have to come to a human rights argument. All you have to know is greater levels of gender diversity deliver increased capability and outcomes. That's the case for gender diversity. The organisations with more gender diverse, particularly leadership teams, perform better. And part of that is when you bring women into male-dominated environments, it's not necessarily that they bring additive skills, but what happens is when you bring them in, the group dynamics change and everyone lifts. And similarly, if we bring men into very feminised environments, the group dynamics change and everyone lifts. That's really the case for diversity. So what's happening now, just finally, is that the Male Champions of Change STEM group will shortly be launched. And we're really thrilled that the federal government has chosen to partner with us to really rely or take advantage of all the work that's come in the Male Champions of Change before, and to stand up an initial Male Champions of Change STEM group, which will sit, I think, and run nicely in parallel with the SAGE pilot. So it's progressed significantly over the last month. We have in place a program director. We have David Thodey, ex-head of Telstra, now chair of CSIRO, and Andrew Stevens, ex-head of IBM, as advisors on how to pull this dynamic group together. And what we're doing at the minute is we are finding and convening influential, powerful male leaders across the STEM employer groups, some of whom are in this room today, to help establish that group and a 12-month action plan. And I have to say, we've had such great response as we've gone out to actively connect with men who we've identified as influential and having the power to create change in the system. So the action plan will include concrete, tangible and visible actions. I see it really as an incubator for some really bold strategies that will be able to be fed also into the SAGE pilot. Many of the goals and initiatives that you are undertaking through SAGE and Athena Swan, I think will be reinforced by the Male Champions of Change strategy. Because one of the great advantages of the Male Champions of Change STEM that I see for the SAGE initiative is the ability to drive rapid change, to implement innovative initiatives in a number of months, not years. That's the thing about Male Champions, it's disruptive, and part of that is because it continues to be quite a controversial strategy. So the Male Champions of Change group will be able to work as an incubator and will be feeding those bold ideas in. And whilst I'll have a role in the Male Champions of Change STEM, I'm just so excited about chairing the expert advisory group for the SAGE pilot, because I think sitting across both the initiatives and holding both these appointments will help me ensure that the initiatives are complementary and that they build on each other to deliver the greatest impact for both these initiatives. What I like to say is no one of us can ever be as good as all of us acting together. And I think that's what we've got in this combination. So I congratulate you on all the work you're doing to drive gender equality in one of what I consider the most important sectors in Australia, in the STEM sector. As one of the previous Secretary Generals of the United Nations once said, he said, "The future is the horizon, but it's also the first step we take tomorrow." And I hope I've given you a couple of steps that you can take even as you walk out of this symposium today. And if you're still not convinced, whilst we're all entitled to our own opinions, we're not entitled to our own facts. And the facts disclose that whilst we have a significant number of PhD graduates from universities being female, women represent still such a small number of those at professorial level and at senior leadership level in STEM organisations. Not only that, there continues to be the gender pay gap. We have the issues around sexual harassment, the issues around women being promoted at a slower rate. But here's another fact. 50% of the talent in nations resides in women. If we want to attract and retain the best, then we need to create environments where men and women can thrive equally. That's why we need to change. Because as a nation, are we prepared to put 50% of the creativity, wisdom and talent that exists to one side purely on the basis of gender? That's what's at stake when we don't agree to step up together. So it's a great pleasure to be here with you today, and I'm really looking forward to being part of your journey over the next 12 months. Thank you very much.
First question on the right-hand side. Or on the left-hand side. Please identify yourself.
Graham Schaefer from La Trobe University. I have a comment and then a question. You said that, and you made an eloquent point, that the reason for pushing gender equity is because everything is better, the outcomes are better when we do that. I thought the reason for doing it is simply because it's the right thing to do. My question revolves around the gender pay gap. You mentioned very briefly at the end about the gender pay gap. My understanding is that the gender pay gap in Australia is increasing. Mm-hmm. And my question is, what do we do about it?
Yeah.
You talked about legislation that is changing, that is forcing change in board appointments. What is the role for legislation in changing the gender pay gap?
Yeah, thanks very much, and I couldn't agree more with your initial observation. It is the right thing to do. You're absolutely right. In relation to the gender pay gap is it's one of the hardest issues to shift. I don't know that it's expanding, but it's not changing. It's sitting at about 18%, around about that. And really, when I think about it, over the 8 years that I was Sex Discrimination Commissioner, it bounced to between 16 and 18% over that period. What we know is that there's no one thing that can fix the gender pay gap because it comes about for a whole variety of reasons. One is the historical undervaluation of women's work. The second, and that is that feminised industries are paid usually less than equivalent or comparable male industries. It's the fact that women are often prepared to trade off money for family-friendly work conditions, so to do that more than men. It's the fact that women are not promoted at the same rates as men. It's a very multifactorial issue. So as to whether one piece of legislation could actually solve that, I think that would be very difficult. Even when you strip out for all those things, the fact that women working more likely to work in flexible work arrangements, they're promoted less, even if you strip out all those elements, what you're still left with a nub of differential in pay, which I don't think you can explain away in any other way than say it's pure sex discrimination. It's the fact that you're male, this person's male and this one's female. That's the part also that we need to work with. And what we need to do there is to change attitudes. It's really about debunking a lot of the gender stereotypes that exist in Australia today. And one of the things I'm quite excited about is that there is greater levels of gender equality education from very early on in the school curriculum now. So the Human Rights Commission and others have been working to embed gender equality information right from age kindergarten and onwards. Because the fact is, one of the other things is you can't be what you can't see. So if I open my books, or story books, and I'm not seeing women as scientists and engineers and whatever, why would I ever imagine I could be a scientist or an engineer? So that's changing as well. But I do think, it's a difficult one to shift. Having said that, and coming back to your legislation question, I think in Portugal they have introduced legislation which says that for 1 month a year, every organisation must publish the gender pay information in a public area, which is usually their reception area. Because what we know is transparency drives change. And then I can go into organisations during that month and I can see, is there a gender pay gap in this organisation? So I quite like it as a strategy. That's what the disruptive things that we've got to start thinking about here. But yeah, other than that, when I look across OECD countries, we're kind of sitting in the middle around the gender pay gap.
Hi, Danielle Scripita, School of Chemistry, University of Wollongong. It's a bit of a comment I just wanted to add to that about the gender stereotypes and early education. My son's 6-year-old in sport on the weekend. It's always, girls versus boys. At the end of soccer, the girls team has to vote for man of the match, which I've taken up, all of these things. But when you say we're making impact there, we need to do so much more. Something I'll throw out to the audience too, if anyone has a cleaner at home, think about your cleaner. It's often female, she's often female, or person, ethnic minority. And so what are you showing in your home to your children? I get my 6-year-old boy to clean the toilet, to do the vacuuming. I don't make a deal about it at all. And we mix everything up at home. So it's exactly what you said. You can't be what you can't see. I bring my 3-year-old into my lab, my office, my workplace, and show him the everyday life of mum as a working mum and a scientist. So, sorry, comment, not a question, but we can all do more starting in our own homes, starting with school sport and things like that too.
I think it's such a great idea, and yeah, our role as parents is just so important because we shape the attitudes of our sons, the expectations of our daughters. What we model, they'll take into their lives. So yeah, such a great point.
Now we have questions on the left-hand side. Could a microphone go to the woman in the back, please? Yeah.
Hi, my name's Sarah Bruff. I'm at the Australian Astronomical Observatory. I had a question about the panel pledge. I think it's a wonderful initiative, but I was very concerned recently to read that women who make it onto those panels are actually being paid less than the men on those panels, and that was a concerning thing to read. I was wondering if you had a more insight into that.
Yeah, no, to be honest, I haven't, but am I appalled? Yes. Am I shocked? Probably no. So, yeah, we've got to work at so many different levels. So maybe we should look at how that goes into the panel pledge. Most of the speaking engagements that the male champions would do, I wouldn't imagine that they would be charging or there would be a charge. But you're right, if there's payment for the panel, that should be identical payment. I mean, you can't argue that that's not a comparable or identical role. It just seems incredible. But we're making small bits of progress. One of the things I love about the male champions is that just the stories that are coming out. I mean, just last week I met a woman down when I was down with DFAT. I do quite a bit of work with Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And she came up to me, she said, "Oh, Liz, you don't know me, but I just want to let you know that I've just been appointed the first ever female ambassador to the Holy See into the Vatican." Now, that's a tough gig, I reckon. But you know what? Fantastic. Go sister, I say. And she said, you know what, that wouldn't have happened without the male champions of change, because that head of secretary of DFAT has set targets at all levels. And so we're looking at to having much more gender equal ambassadors as well across all our missions across Australia.
We have time for one more question. I saw some hands up over here. We could get a microphone down to the middle, my left. And please stand so we can see you.
Hi, Joanne Harrison from Defence Science Technology Group. On your Male Champions for Change, do you have much representation from media agencies? Because it seems that the media has a lot of power to shape opinion and to skew opinion. I'm thinking of the recent Morrison Words at Work story that got sort of hijacked by superfluous.
You're right. Which missed absolutely the power of a campaign. That was about think about words because words shape culture and words can be powerful. But yeah, you're right. You know, the whole debate was, well, was that a one word too far using the word guys? But you're absolutely right. We have a couple of media representatives. We've got the head of Channel 10, who's a really great guy, Paul Anderson, who's doing a lot there at Channel 10. We've got the guy who's the editor of Herald Sun, which is the most widely read newspaper in Australia. So we are making some inroads there, but realistically, if you were to do it in a very concerted way, I think you'd have to get the heads of many media agencies. So you'd do Male Champions of Change Media. We've got Male Champions of Change Property, we've got Male Champions of Change Architect, we've got many others starting to emerge. And I think what you're suggesting there, which is a great suggestion, Male Champions of Change Media.
Couldn't agree more. As somebody who has survived in a variety of newsrooms in the public and the private sector, I'm here to tell you that the men dominate and very, very few women get to the top. And the ones that do, because the culture is so old and so entrenched, it's very much a kick-down, suck-up culture. And it really, really needs assistance. So I also support that.
You might be able to convene it then, Lee.
Oh, yeah.
Or bring them together.
As long as you pay me the same amount of money.
Oh,
as Rupert
absolutely.
Murdoch. Well, thank you very much, everyone. It's now time for break. So